You could argue that the best game of the 1984 college football season was the first one. In fact, this was arguably the best matchup in the history of the Kickoff Classic. Facing the defending national champions were the Auburn Tigers, led by the infamous Bo Jackson. Auburn came in on a 10-game winning streak, including this Sugar Bowl victory against Michigan. Although Miami was defending national champion, the Hurricanes were ranked 10th before the 1984 season started. Auburn, meanwhile, was ranked 1st. Now, like many of you, I don't really understand why they bother with these preseason polls. I mean, I guess it helps with the odds makers, but I really think it's ridiculous to judge a team before it's played a single game. But before we get into the details of this game, let's take a look at what the Kickoff Classic was and where it comes from. Well, it all goes back to 1975 when the New York Giants were finally given the final go-ahead to build Giants Stadium in the Hackensack Meadowlands in New Jersey. Now, Giants Stadium was a major investment of public funds, which is why it was so controversial in the mid-70s when it was built. As you can imagine, the people who put this kind of money into a project like that wanted to get some money out of it. The New York Giants played there, obviously, but the last place 1976 Giants only had 7 home games. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights played some of their home games at the Meadowlands in 1976. However, despite going undefeated that season, the team didn't exactly sell out, as you could see here. Though 42,000 fans for a Rutgers game was a pretty decent crowd, that was barely half the capacity of cavernous Giants Stadium. It's really no surprise that the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority decided to try to convince major college football teams to use their stadium for neutral site games. Giants Stadium was the site for a few notable games in 1977, most famously was that year's Notre Dame Army game. There was also a lot of talk in 1977 about hosting a bowl game in Giants Stadium. That bowl game idea turned into the Garden State Bowl. This is one of the many defunct bowl games that many of us have either forgotten about or never knew existed in the first place. The Garden State Bowl was approved by the NCAA in late April 1978 and started officially that December. Though attendance was okay, these bowl games never seemed to sell out, and they had a rough time attracting high-quality teams. It turns out that most teams don't want to play in New York in late December. By July 1982, the Garden State Bowl had folded, chiefly due to poor revenue. Well, that left the New Jersey Sports Authority in a bind. It had a perfectly nice stadium, but no bowl game to feature it. But it didn't take very long for an answer to emerge. The Kickoff Classic became a thing in early January 1983, 6 months after the Garden State Bowl had passed away. Well, the idea here was kind of creative. This was going to be a kind of preseason bowl game. It didn't count as an official NCAA bowl game, but it was the same concept. The Sports Authority would try to get the best matchup it possibly could to attract a large crowd and hopefully a television audience. It would take place during Week 0, which is a concept we still have today. This is the week before the season officially started, and the game, of course, would be televised. The first edition of the Kickoff Classic featured Penn State, who were defending national champions, and Nebraska, who were ranked first at the beginning of the 1983 season. As you can imagine, this game was given all sorts of media hype. In a way, you could think of it as a national championship game to start off the season, and it was the only game played around the country on that particular date. The 1983 game was televised by Katz Sports, who paid $1.5 million for the rights. Katz, of course, would then sell its broadcast to local networks, including networks that were already affiliates of major national stations. And so in Omaha, Nebraska, the local NBC affiliate, KMTV, bought the game and decided not to air a part of the popular Godfather miniseries on NBC. Now remember, this is before the famous Supreme Court ruling in 1984. The NCAA was still strictly restricting the number of games that could be featured on television. That's why it's important to understand that this was a preseason bowl game. If this were a regular season game, it would have been on ABC. Now, Penn State and Nebraska was an interesting matchup. It had been one of the most exciting college football games of the 1982 season, and that game was also on national television. Penn State defeated Nebraska on that date in September 1982, winning on an unforgettable last-second pass. However, as highly anticipated as the Kickoff Classic match in 1983 was, it quickly turned into a rout. Nebraska took out its frustration on Penn State, starting off what would be an undefeated regular season. And as we mentioned earlier, Nebraska did lose to Miami eventually in the Orange Bowl, missing the national title by a single point. But to be frank with you, the 1984 matchup really was a lot more interesting. Auburn was one of those old-fashioned running teams, and they had one of the best running backs of all time. Miami, meanwhile, had a passing attack that would not look out of place in today's game, to tell you the truth. This was a remarkable match for many reasons. For one, it was Jimmy Johnson's first game as Miami head coach. Now, I could only imagine how hard it would be to come on as a new head coach of the team that had just won the national championship. Miami had Bernie Kosar, who was one of the best passers in the country, at quarterback. Auburn didn't have a set quarterback yet, but of course it had Bo Jackson. The hype for this game was real, and it was contagious. The opening kickoff gives you an idea of just how intense this game really was. Auburn didn't do anything on his first possession, but Kosar drove the length of the field, culminating in this touchdown. The out-of-bounds call was overruled. Kosar was brilliant, and his receivers, in this case Willie Smith, were even better.
Miami on Auburn's 35.
And then there was Alonzo Highsmith, who was simply an amazing rusher for Miami.
45, still going, and he's down at the 48-yard line. Warren Williams, Alonzo Highsmith are the running back. They give it off to Highsmith, 30, 35, 40, and over the 45, and out he comes to the 46-yard line.
However, Kosar occasionally made some pretty bad decisions.
Willie Smith stepped in now as number one. The pass is blocked, intercepted by Auburn. Big break for Auburn.
Now, to show you how different the game was back in '84, this was Auburn's first completed pass of the night, and it came early in the second quarter. Pat Washington was the quarterback. Auburn tied the game up on the same drive. However, Miami was clearly in control early in this game. Kosar looked brilliant, and this made it 14-7 Miami. Highsmith continued to look good despite this fumble. Auburn did come back with a field goal to make it 14-10. And that was followed by one of the worst kickoff returns I've ever seen. During that same drive, Miami's punter made a split-second decision after an awful snap, opting to settle for a safety instead of risking an Auburn touchdown. It was now 14-12 Miami. Interestingly enough, this is where things quieted down a little bit. Auburn had more runners than just Bo Jackson, of course. For example, here is Brent Fullwood. And that clock-consuming drive led to this field goal, putting Auburn up 15-14. Well, I told you this was a close one. Kosar continued to make excellent passes. However, Bernie was far from perfect. This was his second interception of the night. We came really close to having a second safety in this game. Auburn just barely avoided it. And then Auburn recovered to go on another long drive, ending after this fumble. Miami came back and scored a field goal of their own, making this a 17-15 game. And now, if there was ever a play you wanted to get back again, this would be it. I mean, Fullwood had nothing but green in front of him. Bo Jackson's biggest run of the game came on that Auburn drive, and he was close to breaking Miami wide open. And then it was Auburn's turn to score a field goal. This favorable bounce made it 18-7 Auburn late in the fourth quarter. Miami came back quickly with this beautiful pass by Kozar. However, although Miami came as close as the goal line on this possession, Auburn's defense held them to a field goal. It was now 20-18 Miami. Now, this next part was it. This was for all the marbles. It was do or die time for Auburn. Tommy Agee broke into Miami territory very late in the fourth quarter. But then it all ended with this failed option play. Auburn's hopes of stopping Miami and getting the ball back with seconds left to play were dashed after yet another incredible Bernie Kozar pass, and this one ended the ballgame. Miami won in the end by the slimmest of margins, despite gaining 482 yards to Auburn's 290. Kozar had an incredible 345 yards passing. And in the end, any notions that critics had of Miami being overrated died with this game. But, of course, there was a lot more to come after that, so subscribe and stick with me and we'll go over the most interesting storylines and games from the 1984 college season.